How's it going, guys? I'm here with INS of Renegades, of course, formerly Greyhound, but then they moved organization after the Renegades guys move on to 100 Thieves. So I guess the best place to start is just sort of where is Renegades at the moment? So, of course, since the pandemic hit, playing pretty much flat out in Australia, a lot of domestic dominance. I was having a look earlier, and I think you're on something like a 12 tournament win streak in Australia, which is pretty crazy. Even kind of have the motivation to keep that up over those tournaments and never flag it in one of them is quite impressive, actually, I think. And I think my first big question is, now you're over in Europe to play Katowice in Pro League, just how much of a shock to the system in general was it, in terms of practice, in terms of playing the officials? How much was it just like, did it feel good to be back in a really competitive environment again? How did it feel coming over to Europe and playing, the top teams once again?
Yeah, I think it's extremely motivating for like every individual. Like, it was hard for people to find motivation to practice and want to get better in Australia.
Yeah.
And with bringing Ali in to the roster, we had like a new, I don't know, guess like a new form of motivation, and bringing him into the roster and just practicing these European teams, it makes you actually want to play the game compared to in Australia, where it's like the same teams each day. Like, you get your Order, your Chiefs,
Yep.
and Avant, who are now Direwolves. And then when you come to Europe, you scrim like at least 5 to 10 different teams. So it's good to have a mixture of teams to practice against instead of just the same people trying to counter each other in practice. That's what I felt like in Australia anyway.
Just in terms of playing scrims and stuff, how rusty did you feel in terms of, potentially maybe just playing in Australia, probably just running the same sort of rounds, I'm guessing, over there. So coming over here and even just playing in scrims, how much was it a shock in that sense of, maybe we need to change a lot of stuff, maybe we need to bring new stuff in, we can't keep running these same rounds?
Yeah, I think when we first came over, we obviously lost Dexter at IGL. So we had a new IGL, and we basically wanted to revamp the playbook, I guess. So we had to add a lot of new strategies. And it was basically just everyone getting up to par with the new European meta and stuff. And it took us like a week or two, maybe a week and a bit, to be at our best performance, like individually as well.
Whilst in Australia, were you watching a lot of the big tournaments? Were you like kind of staying, like maybe you were watching demos and looking for ideas? Was it truly coming over here and you really felt like you were, just 9 months behind in terms of the play style you were bringing?
100%. It always feels like that when we come over,
Okay.
especially after such a long period of time in Australia. And it's like, since the games are not on LAN, it's sort of hard. Like, I don't find it as exciting to watch the events, if that makes sense, because it's online and all that stuff. But probably not watching as many demos as I should be in Australia. But when we come to Europe, like, we're just grinding the demos a lot more, basically.
So regardless then, whether it was a pandemic or not, just flying over like you have in the past for these sort of events, do you feel like you need to come a bit early and maybe, I don't know, maybe have a 2-week boot camp just to get up to speed?
100%. That's always the goal, to have a boot camp beforehand, especially because it's such a long flight. Even besides preparing, it's like, it takes us a week to get over jet lag, even when we came this time.
Yeah, I imagine
like everyone, brains aren't working for a week or something.
Yeah, I can imagine that just time zones, you must be totally out of it for a bit of time where, just trying to adjust that much. Yeah, that's kind of an aspect a lot of people don't even think about, is just traveling around the world, relocating, even getting used to the food, I guess, maybe in Europe is a bit different. So even just outside of the game, what's it like having to move continent just to, play CS and all that?
Yeah, that's the first step. Before even coming into CS, and I think we all have a pretty good routine. Like, some of us are used to it, maybe Ali not so much because he hasn't been over in Europe for at least 2 years or something. But before that, everyone else was used to it. But
okay. No, carry on.
I think the time zone makes a huge difference.
Yeah. So obviously you just finished playing in Katowice. In terms of your games at Katowice, you had a close game with Mouse, who of course has Dexter now, so that was probably a bit of an unusual matchup, that one. And then You lost that game, you fell to the lower bracket, and then you fell out ultimately to Virtus.pro, a Virtus.pro in very hot form, who of course went to the final of the whole tournament. So I guess my question is, in that game in particular with Virtus.pro, how did that actually feel in the server? Because presumably for you guys that have been playing for so long in Australia, just playing a team like Virtus.pro, which is really different play style to the top European teams, how did that actually feel to play a team like Virtus.pro and see the sort of rounds they were running?
We sort of prepared for them pretty well, to be honest. Like, we expected a lot of the stuff, we knew what they were doing, and it was just like really simple stuff where, say for example on Vertigo, Ukenda would do the same thing every round when he came up A ramp, and we knew he was doing it, but he was just killing us and, like, I don't know, just owning us. Felt like they were getting the man advantage a lot, and they were just waiting to punish our mistakes. Honestly, I can't really remember the game because it was a week ago now. Deleted it out of my memory. But that's the main things that I noticed.
Would you say it might be a case of, even though you might have seen in demos how they were playing, just not having the physical experience on the server playing a team like them might have made a big difference in that sort of matchup? Do you think if you played them again today, it might be a very different match?
Probably, yeah. I think we've changed a lot even since between Kato and Pro League. So I think it might be, but it all came down to, like, just our individual mistakes. We were punished a lot on Dust 2. Vertigo, sorry, was a closer match.
Yeah.
I think we lost a few bad rounds that could have changed the game for sure. But I think it would be different if we played them again. But they're in really good form right now, so not too beat up about losing to them.
In terms of, you just mentioned making some individual mistakes. Do you think that might just be an aspect of not playing in a top level competition for such a long time? Even for you personally, do you feel like your own kind of individual game has been a bit lower than you might have wanted, having such a long period just playing in Australia?
Yeah, it just comes down to not being punished enough in Australia. Like, we can do bad peaks constantly. We can do bad strats, and it's not going to get punished as much as it does here in Europe. And I think it comes down to that mainly.
So with Renegades, I think you brought in Miffa as a coach. I think something like July or that sort of period, maybe August, was a potential reason that he was brought in to try and get over some of these problems you had with just playing in Australia and trying potentially to kind of keep pushing yourself to be better tactically or not make so many individual mistakes or pick up bad habits potentially. Was this an aspect of bringing him in as a coach?
Yeah, there was a lot of aspects of bringing in him as a coach. Like, he was experienced. We always wanted a European coach because obviously it helps a lot, and not as many good coaches in Australia. He definitely helped with a lot of that stuff. It was just unfortunate that we couldn't attend a LAN or a bootcamp or anything together.
Yeah.
And because of COVID, obviously. But yeah, the main reason we brought him in was we needed someone to help. At the time, it was Dexter. We needed someone to help him with the IGLing and on the workload, I guess. It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, well, for those that don't know, in CS, in-game leaders essentially run everything, and even to the levels of booking scrims and managing tournaments. So I can imagine potentially something like Dexter might have been doing a lot of that in Renegades before you brought in Miffa. But something we've kind of touched on a few times here is just sort of the motivation levels playing in Australia during this period since the pandemic. I mean, nobody would blame you guys for having flagging motivation, especially after winning so many tournaments in a row. So for you personally and some of your teammates, have you really felt like, it was hard to stay totally focused during this period? Was it really hard to stay as motivated as like in the zone as you had been in the past when there was always the promise of tournaments coming up?
Yeah, it was definitely hard to stay motivated and on top of, like, the meta. Because most of us live in Melbourne anyway, and we were in like a 6-month lockdown or whatever it was. We were basically just playing games all day anyway. So I was still playing a lot of CS and pugs and stuff, but just not keeping in touch with the meta as much as I probably would if I was in Europe.
I guess another aspect with playing in Australia during this period is that you just wouldn't have that much exposure to different styles of play or different, just different defaults, different setups. You would just kind of maybe just playing the same teams literally every single day and in the same tournaments, in the same finals. So from that perspective, did you just feel like you just weren't seeing a lot of different kind of styles of CS, a lot of different, was there not a lot of ideas coming into the team because you're just not facing different styles of team?
100%. There's always going to be like when you're in Europe and you're getting punished by these teams, like for example, with Scrim Furia, and they would just be so aggressive, and you don't get that in Australia. So it's like you're not used to it, and then when you start screaming them, you work out ways to like counter it and stuff. And that's just something you don't get in Australia because I feel like in Australia people don't really react of how other teams are playing. They just play how they want to play. If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So even just in terms of scrimming in Europe, I guess playing some of these, maybe there's some of the CIS teams, or
Oh
maybe
yeah.
maybe you're practicing some of the more tier 2 teams or tier 3 teams. I'm guessing in your scrims alone, you must just be seeing so many different play styles, so many different ways of approaching bomb sites or executes. Yeah, has it been like? Since you've been over in Europe, has it just been like there's so many ideas you've had for how to change the game? Maybe you're talking after practice saying, we saw this team do this, maybe we should add it ourselves. Has this been kind of a big thing that's been going on whilst you've been over here?
Yeah, that happens a lot. It's we did that a lot before scrims in theory time, where people are like, for example, you'll see someone do something in a demo because there's been a lot of matches going on recently, and it's just like a minor aspect that you want to add to, say, your default or one strat. Like could just be an extra flash to stop something on a set strategy, and people will just add that in by themselves without the IGL like having to say it or anything. So
Yeah.
they'll bring it on board, and it helps the IGL a lot.
So obviously we just had Katowice being played out. Was there any teams particularly that went late in those playoff games that you've watched a lot of demos of? Maybe I know from speaking to other people that teams like Virtus.pro and Gambit, they just bring so many different ideas to the game. So have any of these teams really kind of piqued your interest in terms of watching them for ideas and stuff?
I think VP have some really cool ideas of how to play late rounds. I think you're spot on about VP and Gambit, like those CS teams, even Spirit.
Yeah,
They have like so many different play styles and ways to play. Like on one side of the map they'll be super aggressive, and then after they're super aggressive they'll be super passive in the same spot, like 20 seconds after, and you just have no idea what they're doing at all times. That's what it felt like for us anyway
yeah.
against VP.
So we've kind
Um,
of so we've kind of touched on it already. Obviously, with Renegades, you did have a roster move very recently with Dexter going out in towards Mouse Sports. You brought Ali in. Presumably, Ali's picked up the in-game leader role. Who is actually calling at the moment for Renegades?
it's meant to be a secret. We're not supposed to tell anyone.
Okay.
It's to keep
Well,
the pressure off.
person X
Yeah.
moving is moved into cooling. So, in terms of this change, just kind of talk me through this transition. And we've mentioned it a little bit already, but is it you trying to start from fresh in terms of starting, maybe even questioning players' spots on certain maps? Has it been starting with a clean slate, or was it like let's kind of work from the basis that we had with Dexter and now try and transition into whoever's calling now for the team?
Um, we started with the basics, and then we were coming across some struggles in scrims earlier in the bootcamp when we were preparing for Kato. So we made those swaps. Like for on CT, for example, me and Ali have swapped on a few maps in some spots, which we did like a week before Kato, and we've just been working on that because it's the way it suits the team more, I guess. If I'm playing some bomb sites with the hats, because we're on bomb sites together on most maps. Yeah, we sort of started with the basics, and then we've just tried to revamp the playbook as we go instead of putting it all at once, like and just rushing it.
Yeah. So is the idea that you just get ABC CS down in the first place, if you want to phrase it that way, and then
Yeah.
potentially moving forwards, you add the more crazy setups or more executes or different ways of calling. I mean, you said maybe a team like Virtus.pro. I can imagine if you got the basics down, adding a few things from a Virtus.pro game or adding some setups or how they like to approach things might be really interesting. So is this kind of the direction you're looking to move in as a team at the moment in terms of getting the basics down and then adding all these ideas from your scrims or watching games? Is that the whole plan at the moment?
Yeah, I think that's always the plan. The basics are the most important thing and probably the hardest things. The defaults, for example, all that stuff, just teamwork in general. And then the meta's always changing, so there's always going to be new executes, new styles, new types taking map control. So that's what we wanted to add in later, which we've started doing already. But for the first like 2 weeks, because we didn't really get to scrim in Australia when we picked up Ali,
Mm-hmm.
it was just like 3 nights and then straight to Europe. So we started with the basics and then moving on to the more detailed stuff later.
From your perspective, coming over to Europe, has your even idea of what the basic game looks like at the moment changed a bit from what you thought before you came over? So maybe before you came over, you thought, I don't know what a good map would be. Maybe I'm guessing Vertigo is actually a map you might have scrimmed quite a lot and seen a lot of differences to what you might have thought before. So even how the way you think about the game, do you think it's actually changed quite a lot in the last few weeks playing all these different teams?
Yeah, I'd say so. People have a lot of different ways of taking, for example, on Vertigo, like the map control they would take, the ways they would take A ramp and stuff.
Yeah,
There's a lot of different variations that we probably never experienced before. Like, because I've also swapped to A ramp on T side Vertigo, so
yeah,
it's like my first time in there, and I have no idea what I'm doing for the first like 2 weeks, and I saw all this new stuff. I was like, what is going on? I'm just blind the whole
yeah.
round, and yeah, it's very different from what I've experienced.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess seeing all the different teams as well, all the different styles must be a bit of a shock to the system, especially on a map like a map like Vertigo. Have you kind of has this been an area you might have been struggling with actually, seeing all these different styles, just sort of trying to get your head around how all these bits actually fit together? So for a map like Vertigo, even for the top level teams, it's still a map that still it feels like it changes every day, and every tournament, the way teams approach ramp control changes. Where now it's a bit more aggressive, for example, and the CTs aren't just smoking ramp every round. So for you, is this have you kind of seen this playing out where it's a bit hard to get on top of how this is all playing together, and trying to really think about kind of framing your head how to really think about these maps, how to approach them yourself?
Um, yeah, I guess so. It's like people in Europe have a lot more, I guess, variations of how they use their util, and
Yeah,
uh, we would just get punished for sitting in spots that people expect you to sit in, basically. So you just get triple naded, double naded, Molotov flashed on retakes and stuff. So I think that's one thing that I've noticed probably the most is you can't basically if you play the more unexpected or the more I guess random you play, like you play in a random position that people don't expect from other pro teams, you probably get punished less if that makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
So have you found that particularly for this time being in Europe, just being unpredictable was a big part? Maybe playing in Australia, maybe you're not getting punished for being predictable as much. Whereas in Europe, maybe if you show the same thing 4 rounds in a row, you might get nade stacked, or they might run a particular take. Is this something you've been finding a lot in terms of your game so far?
People are always just reacting in Europe. That's what I noticed. They react to how you play, and because they've watched demos, they've watched a million demos. You can't just copy the exact default from other teams because they're going to be prepared for that default 9 times out of 10. So yeah,
So now that you've got Katowice out of the way, obviously for you guys, the next big tournament is going to be Pro League. And from looking at your group at Pro League, it's a bit of a mixed bag because you've got some big names, but with so many rosters up in the air, there's a lot going on. So in your group, I believe it's Big, Heroic, OG, Complexity, and FPX. And Heroic and OG, I don't think OG have announced their fifth, but we have a good room of who that's going to be. And then FPX has just brought Sunny in. So this is a really strange group. We've got quite a lot of experience across the teams, but so many roster changes. I can imagine prepping for these teams is pretty difficult, where some of them you don't even know what spots they're going to be playing. So talk me through kind of the preparation for these games. Has it been a bit difficult for some of these teams with changes to really kind of prepare for these games and think about what maps you're going to pick into and this sort of thing?
I think with teams like Heroic, they've made 2 roster changes, but they've still got the same IGL, so they're going to be playing. You'd think they're going to be playing the same maps, same style, for example. So it's not too hard to prepare. Obviously, the CT spots is different, but with limited practice time, you'd think the players are just going to slot in and fill those positions probably. That's how I see it anyway. OG, I haven't looked at the rumors or anything. I don't even know who they're getting, so we'll find out next week, I guess.
Yeah, but the
Uh,
rumor was Nico of Heroic, but
Nico.
totally unconfirmed. And
Oh
I guess
right,
you'll
yeah,
find out in the server who
yeah,
they
we'll
get.
find out. I guess hopefully it'll probably be announced before then.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, I think it's also really hard to prepare without a like full-time coach,
yeah,
because that's most of the jobs, like most of preparing is done by coaches. That's what Mytho was really good at. Even in Australia, like just preparing counters and antes for other teams helped a lot.
So you actually without support staff at the moment? Is it just the five of you in the server, or have you got managers, or have you got analysts around the team?
We have a manager and we
Mm-hmm.
have a guy that's helping, but he's not really part of us.
Okay.
He's just helping with tiny, like little things.
So it's mainly on you guys yourselves to prep for these games or watch demos. Have you actually doing this as a team quite a lot, like watching some demos together, especially as you're at boot camp?
Yeah. We started watching demos and we're preparing that way. But we're just gonna try not too much counter, try play our own style. Uh, I think we're pretty confident.
Well, I'm guessing at this point for you guys as a team with a recent change, it must be the case that the focus kind of has to be getting your own stuff down. If you spend too much time worrying about these other teams, I mean, yeah, I can imagine that's what's going on. So, is this the case? Is the focus totally on just getting the basics down, and then if we've got time, we can prep for these games. But let's focus on ourselves first.
Yeah, you never want to focus too much on countering teams because probably getting your head a bit too much. But it's just the little things that we need to find out, like just the positions people play that we can abuse. Like someone might sit in the same spot a lot, and you can counter that by doing this, etc. So yeah, we'll work on that little stuff in the week to come.
So talk me through expectations in this group. It's a bit of a mixed bag, as you said, with roster changes. So presumably you're looking to potentially get a couple of series wins, but what is the aim? Is the aim just to get out of these groups? Talk me through kind of your expectations going into this group stage.
The goal's always to get out of groups. I think we can, with the way we've been playing lately, I think we can definitely take it to all these teams.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we first came to Malta, we've scrimmed complexity and we just got dumpstered. It was like
Yeah.
27-3. And then the day after they lost, they got owned by someone in Katowice, I think. Oh, I can't remember, but um, yeah, I think the goal's always to get out of groups, and I think we definitely have a shot to do it, especially with all these new roster changes.
So off the back of Katowice, do you feel like even in this short period of time you've actually improved a lot? I mean, I know scrims are
100%.
scrims, but even in the scrims themselves, does it feel like you're a totally different team actually from a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, I think people have just gotten used to European style a lot more, so it definitely helps the extra time between Kato and Pro League. We've probably learned a lot since then. So we're we were getting owned in scrims by like even tier two European teams, and now we're taking it to much better teams
So
the past few days.
in terms of the format for Pro League, I believe it's a round robin, best of three. So you'll play a lot of games, and I think for you guys, just getting exposure to all these different teams in proper series where you'll go in knowing what maps you're going to pick, knowing roughly the veto, preparing for these teams a little bit. I think actually for a team like you guys, it couldn't really be better this format versus a format where maybe it's just maybe a GSL group where you play two games and then go out, or a single elimination bracket. So in terms of this format, is this a format you're actually really looking forward to playing all these different teams, seeing all these different styles, especially in your group when there's actually a really good variety of teams there in terms of what you're going to see? So talk me through this format and how it impacts Renegades.
I think this format's really good. The best in each team is definitely a plus. Like BO3s, I think the times are good as well. So being able to verse each team is really good, rather than just losing, say, a beer one and a beer three and being knocked out. Well, I guess we won one match at Cato, but yeah, I think you always favor the underdogs in beer ones, but I think I'm looking forward to beer three personally.
In terms of, so you played a series against Virtus Pro. Are you looking at in the sense of, presumably in that game, just losing that game, you probably learned quite a lot from watching those games back and thinking about how they went. So in terms of playing five best of threes against, even though some of these teams have made roster changes, of course, across them, they've got quite a lot of experience. I mean, even though Heroics made some changes, you still expect them to come with a high level. So in terms of after these games are played, you should have a lot of kind of data to go on as a team and things to think about, even if you do go back to Australia. So from that whole perspective of just getting better as a team, do you think this will help a lot playing all these games, playing all these teams?
100%, it'll definitely help. Just playing together as a team, getting punished for our mistakes will help us in the long run as well. The goal is always to get better day by day, but we also we think we can win. So that's the main goal rather than just focusing on improving.
So in terms of the pandemic in general, it kind of looks like we are sort of on the way out of it at the moment. For example, in the UK, in terms of vaccinations, we're getting pretty far into it now, and it does feel like by July, maybe August, we will be in a position where you might be able to travel. So long term, have you guys even started to think about what you might do? Maybe you'll stay for some prolonged periods in Europe, or probably Europe, but maybe NA as well. Have you really thought about, when we get out of this and we get back to a more normal system, what you want kind of your yearly kind of formats to look like in terms of where you're playing from?
Yeah, well, the ideal scenario for us is like being able to live at home in Australia
Mm-hmm.
with our families or girlfriends, friends and stuff. And then before events, being able to travel to Europe, have a 2 week boot camp, have a 1 week boot camp, whatever we need to have. That's the ideal scenario if we can travel. Our main focus right now is playing Pro League, getting out of groups, like doing the best we can, and then finding a way home if possible.
Mm-hmm.
Because no one wants to be stuck away from their family for. Because if we don't go home, we could be stuck here till September, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
it's very hard to get back in Australia right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So a recent bit of news we actually had in CS was, maybe not news is the wrong word, but we had a lot of people talking about how some of the NA players are coming over to Europe, and then they're playing for prolonged periods, and maybe, it's a very different environment. And then a kind of counter argument was, okay, well, Renegades, when it was the previous team, they played years in North America away from home, and you're saying that you guys would much prefer playing at home. So talk me through this kind of dynamic of playing away from home. It's obviously a massive sacrifice, but yeah, it's a difficult one to balance out. But how would you weigh in on this whole discussion of playing in a different continent for a prolonged period? Is it really a genuinely massive sacrifice as a person outside of the game?
I'd say it definitely is. For a lot of players, like mental health is super important, and just being away from girlfriends, family, and stuff, it's definitely hard on you, but it is a sacrifice most players are willing to make. Um, Obviously, on a normal year, you'd be able to travel home, see your families more, etc., etc. I think if we wanted to move, we would try to move to Europe, not North America, just because personal choices, we'd prefer Europe rather than North America. But Australia is like perfect for us right now. In a normal year, would be like playing qualifiers for most big tournaments, getting invites or whatever that we need to attend.
Yeah, well, I guess it seems to me that when we get out of this pandemic anyway, I think a lot of the CS is just going to stay in Europe at the rate it's going, especially with a lot of the amount of NA players going over to Valorant and the lack of tournaments they've got. It just seems likely that CS is going to be EU centric for the next couple of years at least. So presumably from your perspective, this is a big factor in leaning more towards Europe as a place. Even if you don't move over, you probably just boot camp in Europe, I guess, if you were playing tournaments. So Europe versus NA, is this how you're kind of thinking about it at the moment?
I think Europe's always been better than America to practice at. There's a lot more variety of teams, I guess, like tier one teams. So there's a lot more practice partners and stuff like that. I think NA at the time, like a year ago, only had Liquid, EG, maybe Furia, the X Renegades, 100 Thieves guys, and then MIBR. And then in Europe, you have all those other teams that just better, a lot more variety, I guess. So that's why we favor Europe boot camps. And most tourneys are in Europe.
In terms of boot camps you've played in the past, does this actually feel that different? Are you approaching this boot camp terribly differently in terms of playing in Europe at the moment? I mean, presumably in the past you haven't come in quite as rusty in terms of the top level games. So does this one feel that different actually for you outside of the COVID stuff itself?
Personally, I think this is like one of the best boot camps I've played at. There's not really any reasoning behind that. Just feels like everyone's at a good level and more motivated than, say, our previous boot camp. I remember last boot camp we went to, it was like a little bit, I don't know, cooked. It was like everyone was in a bad situation and like, I don't know, it was just a weird situation and a weird time. And this one, everyone has way more motivation than last time.
Do you feel like it might just be an aspect of after whatever it be 10 months or something of just playing in Australia, just having almost the release of now coming over to Europe, being able to play the top teams, like actually being able to kind of test yourself on the server as it was? Do you feel like this might be a reason that this boot camp might feel a bit different because, this is finally your opportunity to get back to playing top level CS after such a kind of prolonged period of just playing domestically?
Yeah, I'd say that definitely helps. It's sort of like, I guess it's a feeling of relief being able
Yeah.
to scrim these teams again compared to even in Australia. Like, we didn't want to scrim order because we played them every tournament, so we didn't want them to get used to our stuff. They didn't want us to get used to how they played. So it was just like scrimming. Not even the tier one Australian teams, if that makes sense. Like the lesser teams in Australia.
Rooster, Paradox, that lot.
More like Paradox and
Yeah.
I think maybe Chiefs every now and then you have like other teams like Bazaar and stuff. We never really scrimmed order. Maybe Avan occasionally.
So just in terms of practice back in Australia, was it just getting very kind of repetitive where you'd almost just play the same teams every single day and maybe even the same maps and this sort of thing? Was it becoming just like the same period over that whatever 9-10 months?
Yeah, it was like Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
10 months scrimming the same teams, doing the same thing. Especially because we couldn't leave the house much because of lockdown. It was sort of draining, I guess. But yeah, it is what it is.
I mean, how does it feel versus presumably now you're just playing loads of different teams and it's pretty easy in Europe just to look for scrims. There's always somebody playing. So just in that sense of seeing so many different teams and breaking out of the monotony of just playing the same 4 or 5 teams, does it just feel really different in terms of the scrimming environment? Is the scrimming environment much better at the moment? Do you feel like people are actually just focusing more on the games because it doesn't? I mean, it's not just like we're playing Chiefs for the 10th kind of day in a row on the same map. Does it kind of feel like you're going into every game a bit more kind of focused and more zoned in, getting more out of your practice?
Yeah, 100%. I think like in Australia, it was sort of like the comms would be just be,
Yeah.
There's one guy here. Oh, there's a guy here. And then in Europe, like it's actually people actually want to play, and the comms are a lot better. Everything's just flowing better. That's how it feels anyway.
Just in general, in terms of how your thoughts about playing CS professionally, did you find it was actually flagging a bit during the period in Australia, and maybe now back in Europe playing these top teams, you've kind of relit the fire as it was just to play professionally and try and compete and try and be a kind of top level competitor in CS? Do you feel like it's actually made a big difference just from the mental aspect of kind of that area?
Yeah, definitely. I think I mean we're always like trying in Australia still, of course, but it's definitely relit a flame and like put a bit of fire in people's bellies to like be better than they were in Australia, I guess. Be the best person be the best player they can be.
Okay. Okay. So I think I'm pretty much running out of questions. So just, do you have any other topics you really want to touch on? Maybe things that you've noticed since being in Europe that have been very different from Australia, maybe outside of the game as well? Is there anything you feel we should hit on here?
Not really. The coffee sucks here. That's all. I compared to Australia.
What is the food like in Malta?
I mean, we're just eating this. It's basically the same stuff. We have like below the business center that we're in, they have like a cafe there.
Yeah.
So we just every day, and it's like €3, sorry, for a meal, which is pretty good. It's better than ordering food in every day, which we were doing at the start. Now we're getting like meals prepared for us in our breaks and stuff, which is awesome.
It sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds more fun than what it's like in the UK at the moment when you just like can't even leave the house really at the moment because it's pretty bad. But anyway, I think we've reached the end of the interview. Do you want to shout out any teammates, sponsors, organisation? This is the time to do it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alan, and I'd like to thank Renegades for supporting us, especially during last year during a tough period, and for the start of this year as well. And my teammates, they're pretty cool, I guess.
I guess there's actually one question I didn't really think to ask. Is just like there's actually a decent amount of tournaments still in Australia, and it feels like there's a lot of push from community members to keep stuff going when potentially historically, you might have Australia champs and all that and some big event qualifiers, but it does seem to me like there are a lot more tournaments domestically. So in your opinion, are people doing some really good work to try and keep the scene going during this very tough period where you're so isolated?
100%. You have all the DreamHack tourneys that we had. Like, I can't remember what they were called. DreamHack Winter, Spring, and stuff. They were super good for the scene, and ESL Australia always do a really good job. And LPL have the grassroots tournaments, which help the scene a lot. I think it's a lot of the Australian TOs are doing a lot of good work.
All right, I think that's a good sentiment to end on. So shout out to all those guys for keeping the events going, because obviously during this period, the Australian players need things to keep them playing and need reasons to keep turning up to the server ultimately. So shout out to those guys, good on them. Good luck to Renegades. Of course, we hope you can put in some good results in your Pro League group, especially some of these teams with roster changes. We hope you can take their series off them and hopefully get into the next portion. Is it just a playoff portion after the group stage, or is it one of the ones where it's like a double set of group stages? What is that actually is the format?
That's a really good question. I'll be honest, I have no idea. I think it's a playoff portion, but I could be completely wrong.
So whatever happens next, we might see them there, whether it's another group stage or playoffs. But it's been fun. I've enjoyed this. Go follow Ins on whatever, Twitter, Instagram, whatever he's doing these days.
Both of them.
There you go. Follow him there. Everywhere else, I'm sure he's got loads of places to follow him. But that's enough from me, and I'll check you guys next time around.
Peace, guys.